Something about this offseason feels different for the Minnesota Vikings. Not calmer, not safer. Honestly, maybe more complicated than Vikings Nation expected. Because while one conversation is centered around a former Pro Bowl pass rusher potentially arriving to strengthen Brian Flores' defense, another is raising serious questions about whether this offensive roster is actually built to compete at the highest level. Add in growing pressure around J.J. McCarthy after Sam Darnold finally broke his silence, plus fresh concerns about the future of the offensive line. And suddenly this team feels like it's standing in the middle of one of the most important stretches of the Kevin O'Connell era. There's one thing about Brian Flores' defenses that keeps showing up every single season. They demand depth, not optional depth, real depth, especially off the edge. And right now, after the Vikings moved on from Jonathan Greenard during the 2026 NFL Draft, there's this uncomfortable reality sitting underneath all the excitement around Dallas Turner finally stepping into a starting role. Because behind Andrew Van Ginkel and Turner, the room suddenly feels dangerously thin. And that matters more than people realize once the injuries start piling up in November and December. You start looking at the names behind them and you see potential, sure. Developmental upside, maybe. But proven NFL production? That's where things get quiet fast. Bo Richter, Chaz Chambliss, Tyler Batty, Cameron Stewart, Arden Walker. There's effort there. There's youth there. But if this defense wants to survive a full season playing the aggressive style Flores demands, Minnesota probably needs another veteran presence. And now the Joey Bosa conversation is starting to feel a whole lot more believable. Bleacher Report recently connected Bosa to the Vikings as a possible fit, and honestly, it makes too much sense not to seriously consider. No, this isn't prime Chargers-era Joey Bosa anymore. The injuries change things. Age changes things. He'll be 31 when the season starts. But when healthy, there's still power in his game. There's still technique. There's still enough explosiveness to affect quarterbacks, especially in a rotational role where Flores could keep him fresh. And you can already picture the mentality this defense would play with if Bosa walked into that locker room. Turner exploding into year 2, Van Ginkel flying around, Bosa rotating in obvious passing situations. Suddenly opposing offensive lines are dealing with waves instead of just surviving the starters. That starts sounding like a defensive front offenses genuinely hate preparing for. But there's another layer to all this that feels even more emotional inside the building right now. Harrison Smith. Because while fans keep debating edge rushers and roster upgrades, one of the biggest voices this franchise has had for over a decade still hasn't fully made his future clear. Judd Zulgad recently talked about how the organization needs an answer soon, and honestly, he's right. At some point, this stops being sentimental and starts becoming logistical. The safety room needs direction. Younger players need reps. Coaches need clarity before camp really starts ramping up. But emotionally, that's hard for Vikings fans to process because Harrison Smith isn't just another veteran. He's one of the last living connections to multiple eras of Vikings football. The Zimmer years, the playoff heartbreaks, the defensive dominance, the leadership, the identity. And if he walks away, it closes another chapter that many Purple faithful probably aren't emotionally ready to close yet. That's why this next month feels important in ways that go beyond football. Because whether it's Joey Bosa arriving or Harrison Smith leaving, this defense may look very different sooner than people expect. There's also something happening quietly with this roster that honestly deserves more attention than it's getting. Everybody talks about quarterback drama. Everybody talks about weapons. But the offensive line, that's becoming one of the most important long-term storylines on this football team. Because if we're being honest, stability up front still feels fragile. Christian Darrisaw never fully looked like himself after coming back from the ACL injury. Brian O'Neill keeps battling through pain every season like a warrior, but you can feel the wear accumulating. Ryan Kelly retiring left a massive hole at center, and suddenly the Vikings are heading into another year where parts of the offensive line still feel uncertain. That uncertainty affects everything: the run game, the quarterback development, even how aggressive Kevin O'Connell can be calling plays. That's why this early 2027 mock draft from CBS Sports caught people's attention so quickly. Minnesota was projected to land Jordan Seaton, the athletic offensive tackle now developing under Lane Kiffin after transferring from Colorado. And the second you watch his tape, you understand why scouts are fascinated. The movement skills jump off the screen, the size, the recovery ability, the raw athletic profile. He's still developing, but there's real upside there. Some evaluators think he eventually transitions to right tackle in the NFL, which honestly could fit Minnesota perfectly depending on where this roster is heading over the next couple years. Because let's be real for a second, nobody knows exactly what the future looks like on this line anymore. And that's not a small issue when you're trying to build around a young quarterback. Then things got even more uncomfortable after Fox Sports ranked the Vikings' offensive supporting cast only 22nd in the NFL. 22nd. Think about that for a second. This is a team with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hockenson, Jawan Jennings, Kevin O'Connell calling plays. Yet nationally, people still aren't buying the full picture offensively. And honestly, some of the criticism isn't unfair. Aaron Jones is getting older. Hockenson hasn't consistently looked like the same dominant mismatch since the injuries. The run game still feels unreliable at times, and after allowing 60 sacks last season, there are legitimate concerns about whether this offense can physically hold up over the course of a season. That's the part fans don't want to hear, but deep down, many already know. Because talent on paper only means so much if the trenches keep collapsing when the games matter most. And now the pressure on this offensive line room feels heavier than ever. What makes that criticism sting even more is the amount of money this organization is pouring into the offense. Nearly $170 million invested on that side of the ball. Think about that for a second. 6th highest offensive spending in football, 4th most invested offensive line, highest tight end spending in the entire league, and yet analysts still look at this group and see flaws everywhere outside of the star receivers. That's frustrating, especially for Vikings fans who've watched this franchise desperately try to build a modern offense around Kevin O'Connell's vision. Justin Jefferson remains one of the best players in football. Jordan Addison keeps developing. Jawan Jennings was a smart addition. But after that, questions start stacking up fast. Is Aaron Jones still capable of carrying a heavy workload? Can Hockenson truly return to elite form? Will the offensive line finally protect the quarterback consistently? Because if those answers don't come soon, all that spending starts getting judged very differently around the league. That uncertainty is hanging over everything right now. And while fans debate the future of the offense, an old emotional wound reopened this week too, because Adrian Peterson finally spoke publicly about the tension between himself and former head coach Mike Zimmer. And hearing it out loud honestly hit harder than expected. Peterson admitted he left Minnesota feeling disrespected specifically by Zimmer, not the organization itself. That matters. Because for a lot of Vikings fans, Adrian Peterson represents an entire era of emotional survival. Some of those teams had flaws everywhere, but every Sunday you believe because number 28 was in the backfield. Hearing that relationship ended with bitterness instead of mutual respect feels disappointing, especially after Peterson described moments where Zimmer questioned his competitiveness and character late in the 2016 season when injuries were piling up. And maybe none of this changes the present-day Vikings directly, but emotionally, it reminds people how complicated this franchise's history can be sometimes. Legends don't always leave cleanly here. Relationships fracture, pride gets involved, and Vikings fans have seen that pattern too many times across different generations, which is why current leadership matters so much now. Kevin O'Connell has built a culture players genuinely seem connected to emotionally. There's communication, there's trust, there's belief. And after hearing Peterson revisit those old frustrations, you realize how important that locker room atmosphere really is moving forward, especially once adversity inevitably hits during the season. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has created more debate lately than the quarterback situation. Because even now, after everything that's happened, there are still Vikings fans wondering if this organization made the right decision letting Sam Darnold walk away. And honestly, I understand why the conversation refuses to disappear. Earlier this week, Darnold finally addressed Minnesota's choice to hand the franchise over to J.J. McCarthy, and his comments were surprisingly respectful. He said he understood the business side, understood the logic of building around a younger quarterback on a rookie deal. He even praised McCarthy directly and said he believes the kid will become a very good NFL quarterback. That's class, especially considering how everything unfolded afterward. Because while Minnesota moved forward with McCarthy, Darnold went to Seattle, signed a massive contract, made another Pro Bowl, won football games, and continued proving his career resurgence wasn't some fluke. Meanwhile, McCarthy struggled through injuries again and delivered an uneven season statistically. 6 wins and 4 losses as a starter sounds decent until you look deeper. The completion percentage, the interceptions, the inconsistency. And that's where the pressure really starts building inside a market like Minnesota. Then came the Kyler Murray signing, which completely changed the emotional temperature around the quarterback room. Because whether the organization says it publicly or not, bringing in Murray sends a message. Competition is here. Urgency is here. Patience is running thinner than expected. And you know what makes this whole thing even tougher? McCarthy was supposed to remove uncertainty from the future of the franchise, not add more to it. That's what makes this situation feel uncomfortable for Vikings Nation right now. J.J. McCarthy was supposed to represent stability, the future, the long-term answer. But now, there's uncertainty again. There's pressure again. Every training camp throw is about to get analyzed. Every mistake will get magnified. And the hardest part is realizing Sam Darnold may have actually earned the right to stay longer than many people initially believed. That's the twist nobody expected a year ago. The Vikings thought they were turning the page toward the future. But somehow the quarterback conversation still feels unfinished. And until somebody fully takes control of that position, this franchise is going to keep living inside that tension. No matter how chaotic things get around this team, one thing never changes. Vikings fans care deeply. Maybe too deeply sometimes. That's what makes all of this feel so emotional every single offseason. We've lived through the hope, the heartbreak, the almost moments, and somehow we still come back believing the next chapter could finally be different. That's what being part of the purple and gold means. So now I want to hear from you. Do you still believe this team is heading in the right direction? Or are the warning signs starting to feel harder to ignore? Either way, we're riding through it together. SKOL Vikings, let's go!